Hi, Jen.
Hi.
Oh, thanks for joining me. For those who don't know, Jen is a designer that I got to meet when I joined my current employer at Dropbox. And yeah, I remember joining the team that I work on, and I think that one of the first projects I could have chosen to work on was with you. And I wanted to work on that project, but I remember that there were some things that were in flux at that time. But I remember just talking about that potential project with you, and I was like, this person's awesome
Oh my gosh, yes.
and a firecracker in a great way. And I think your background as well also just felt very resonant as somebody who had worked within the gaming space. That's a little bit of historical context there. I quote Jen twice in the book because she always has great things to say, which I could tell even from, again, the first time that I got to start exploring a potential project with her. But yeah, Jen, catch us up. Who are you at this moment? What are you doing these days? What's shifted for you since the last time that we talked for the book?
I am a staff designer at Mercury. Mercury is a financial technology company that offers banking services to founders and builders, everything you would need to run your business. What have I been up to? I've been here for about 2.5 years. I have been moving through this interesting progression of being a direct embed in a team to an embed plus supporting surrounding teams. And now I'm moving into working on company priorities, high impact things, but not actually embedded. So a little bit more like was it portfolio design
I
model
think
at
that's what they
Dropbox?
call us. Yeah.
It's been
Yeah.
a really fun rocket ship ride. When I started here, we were about 600 people. Now we're over 1,000. We just closed another funding round. It's a wild time.
Congrats. That's so cool. I am curious what it's been like, as much as you can share, of course, about the change going from maybe more of a mid-sized company to a larger company. What have you noticed?
This is the first time I've done this. When I worked in gaming, I was at maybe a 500-ish person spot, a 12-person spot, an 80-person spot. Dropbox was 2,500 to 5,000 when I was there. So this is really the first time I've seen this particular shift. And I've heard from other people that it's pretty unique, this moment. What has it been like? I've also moved teams within Mercury during that time. And so it's felt like I've worked at three completely different companies in the past 2.5 years. And
It's
I don't
kind of,
think that's bad.
yeah, that's cool, right? It's more variety. Most of the places I've worked, I've switched around, and the places I haven't worked, I kind of got bored after about 2 years. So I think it's awesome that you've gotten to see so many different parts of the company already.
Yeah, it's been great. If people are curious, I started off in growth here at Mercury, working on the application for the product, and then moved into the payments space. So anything you would need to do to send a wire and ACH. And then I'm moving into something new that I can't talk about, but I'm really excited about. And
Fun. We love an NDA project or something mysterious that maybe will come out at some point, and then we can look back at it and be like, wow, that's so fun. Finally, we know what that was. That's awesome. I'm trying to remember how long you were at Dropbox for.
5 years.
Okay, wow. Yeah, that was a hot minute. And so I do recall you had a fair amount of influence. What was it like going from a place where you had a fair amount of sway to a totally new place?
It was unexpected for me that when I joined I joined as a staff designer, and I found that coming in with that title, I was granted a lot of influence just by default, especially as the company was smaller. But I still needed to make these connections with the people who make decisions at Mercury. And at a company of this size, that's the CEO, that's the COO. And this very quickly unearthed a huge growth area for me, which is I was deeply uncomfortable talking to the leadership team because I felt like I didn't have anything to offer them, especially really early on. But the manager who hired me really pushed me to just get really comfortable talking to them, even just for 20 minutes every once in a while. And that made it a lot easier to be able to go to them when a really big decision needed to be made or we had to work through something spicy. But that's very new for me. And I've found that the influence has come from that exposure to those people. I could not have just gotten by with just saying, I'm a staff designer, here I am.
That makes sense and tracks pretty well in my own experience at smaller companies. And obviously, 600 people is already, that's a lot of human beings. But at the same time, the smaller a company, the more autonomy, the more trust I think there tends to be. And there's almost a logic of you got hired, so you must be good at your job enough to be here. What can you share with us and how can you help us get to where we're trying to go? Versus, I think at a larger company, there's so much historical context and so many other people who have been there for a very long time, and that maybe there's a little bit more of a sense of having to prove that you've got something new to share with the group. And yeah, I think that shift, I can totally imagine how that felt pretty intense, or
Yeah.
it was a good thing, obviously.
There's also another piece that I think about a lot in hindsight, which is Mercury really deeply integrates the design function. So you remember that whole bit in the late aughts where design had to earn a seat at the table and you had to fight to be heard? That is not a thing at Mercury. Design actually predates the product function. They're in
Whoa.
it. So we're not trying to get a seat at the table. We're built in. We're like a banquet. We're already in. We're attached. And that helped a lot with influence too, because I didn't have to spend that energy trying to explain to people what designers even do. Everybody knows, everybody values it. And that is awesome. It's actually the first time I've experienced that at a company.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever had that. So I'm a bit jealous because
Oh,
that sounds really cool. I have worked at places where design has finagled their way into the conversation, but there's often more of a push-pull. And what you're saying is a good reminder that sometimes the historical context of a company will impact the org design and the way that certain functions are treated. And when you're trying to figure out where you should work, that can be something to consider as part of your thinking process. So thanks for sharing. It's really cool to hear about a company that has essentially been design led from the early days.
it's something I was looking for when I left Dropbox. And I found a lot of the things on my list. I wanted a smaller place, a company with product market fit, a leadership team that's really tuned into the product, really understands the customers. So it's been really great. And those companies are out there. You can find them.
People will always reference like Airbnb or like Figma. Sounds like Mercury's also on that list. Awesome. Thank you for sharing some details about just what life has been like for you these days. I am curious in chapter 5 of the book that I wrote. I quoted you. I quoted you because one thing that a lot of people want to know about in terms of how to show up as a staff designer is, okay, how do I not just get caught up in, the smaller day-to-day pieces of work? And so we're often looking for these bigger, more strategic projects. But you obviously don't want to like overextend on that kind of thing, and you want to figure out like when is the right time to actually push for this kind of thing. And one thing I really liked that you said in terms of thinking about when to embark on a visioning journey was, do I have something that needs to be said? And do I have an audience that is willing or able to hear it? How how did you figure out that was something that needed to be asked firstly?
I think at places I've worked in the past, I would see a lot of visions get spawned, and I would see a lot of effort that people put into them, myself included, and they would sometimes land on deaf ears. And I think a big part of that was timing. So, did this vision come out when the team was already fully invested in something else and just has no space to consider something else? I just worked on a vision at Mercury with my team, but the timing of it was around H2 planning and really figuring out how we respond to some of the things that have been happening in the industry. I think if I had done this same exercise at the end of last year when people were really heads down wrapping things up, it probably wouldn't have landed in the same way. But I had the forum. I had H2 planning, a group of people invested, ready to hear H2 plans. This particular group responds really well to prototyping and seeing and feeling. So I used all of that to figure out how I actually want to present this message to them. And it would have been very different if they were a group that loved a 10-page document or a 5-page set of slides. So I think a lot of a vision landing really goes into, is the setting correct? Do you know the way the people you're talking to need to hear a vision or will be most receptive to a vision, and focus on that? And I think the big shift for me as a designer was dropping this idea that there's one way to do a thing and there's a correct way or the best way, and really moving into what's the most appropriate way for this group, for this time.
A vision is a tool, and you need to make sure that you're using it appropriately and designing it for it to land the way that you would like it to land with the audience. I am curious how, if at all, social capital comes into play as part of this work, if you don't mind sharing reflections on that as well.
Being given the forum to present in a planning meeting, I got that opportunity because of my position on the team. If I had maybe presented in past forums and not landed the message I was trying to land, or I wasn't very clear, I think I wouldn't have been afforded the opportunity again as readily. So social capital does come into play. The way you do things and the type of impact you have builds your reputation over time. And I feel lucky that I have a really supportive manager who also set the scene for me to succeed, presented me as this person who was going to do this work. So she fills my social capital bucket on my behalf, which is great.
That's really nice when you have the runway set by somebody so that you can actually start to take off and deliver something and really focus on doing the work well versus having to champion and say, hey, we should do this, we should do this. And I guess that's part of, again, like quoting you, it sounds like you already knew going in that there was an audience that wanted this vision. And there are times when maybe the audience doesn't want to hear that or isn't ready for it. What does that kind of look like when people aren't ready to receive a vision?
I think about a year and a half ago, I ended up making a vision for envisioning a world where a different problem was solved in a different way. And it was not something that people necessarily wanted to hear. I had noticed a trend in some customer feedback, something I'd picked up from just experiencing the product. And to tackle that effectively, there's a couple things that I think had to happen. One was time. So people need to hear things a couple times, evidence, different kinds of evidence. Whenever I push for something, I try to make sure I have two of the three, qual, quant, and intuition. And so I needed to make sure that I had those pieces to bring it to light. Mercury really cares about the customer experience. So that piece was probably the easiest to get. There were things that customers were noticing that didn't quite make sense to them. And so that's my wedge in here with this group of people, to focus on the customer and then bring in the other elements of, here's how we could solve this differently for them, even if people aren't necessarily ready to hear it. And with that project, I ended up saying it or surfacing it in different ways, probably 5 or 6 times before it really took off and we were able to tackle it. And it was a huge chunk of work. I think it took about a year and we got to a good outcome. It's not a fully solved problem by any means, but I think it's the next time someone goes in to tackle it, they'll have all of these data points too, and then they'll be able to build something more robust.
That's a really good reflection on how long and how many times you sometimes have to go about, yeah, actually rallying for an idea. It can take a long time for people to open up to the fact that maybe that work stream needs to happen. There's a lot of persistence that is required. And sometimes the first swing is not enough, right? Sometimes you have to come back later and course correct or add on some work. A lot of times the vision is never fully complete, or maybe it's more that maybe you finish proposing the idea, but then it's usually an illustration of where you're trying to go, But then once it's out there, you learn from that and you see what you maybe have to do next.
Yeah, and I think that there's also really different skill sets and energy involved in having that vision, building that vision out, and then delivering that and having that appear in the world. So I had a lot of reflection after this, and there were also a number of things about the business and the external factors that I didn't fully understand when I initially pitched the vision. So I would do something different today than what I did then. I guess what I'm trying to say is there isn't a perfect way to do it, and I think there's always going to be new factors that come in.
I really appreciate your clearly you reflect a lot on things like, okay, what can I do better in the future? Or is this the right time? Why hasn't this information been received in the way I was hoping? Things of that nature. I think sometimes when it comes to staff design work, people get really frustrated and burn out very easily. And I think that taking these opportunities as viewing them as opportunities really to learn and to try again and to experiment almost can create maybe more of a sense of hope. I am just, as an aside, curious like how you learned to be persistent versus quit maybe while you're ahead.
It wasn't easy. I had a lot of tearful one-on-ones with managers saying things like, "Oh, if I was just a better designer, if people respected me more, this would have landed, this would have worked the first time." And I've heard from enough people who are senior to me with a lot more experience that sometimes it takes 5, 10, 15 swings. Sometimes these big changes take years and years. And I've seen that come through years later from things I worked on at Dropbox in like 2020, 2021. I still use the product, love her.
Nice.
And I see things that I had advocated for and pitched way back then. And so I look at it less of if something I'm working toward doesn't land, it's not a failure. It's I added to the record and someone else will be able to pick up from that too.
That is lovely and so critical. It's often just a timing piece, or maybe it's just not painful enough for the company to invest in such a major change at that moment. But trust, when it's time, they will be hurting and they will finally say, okay, cool, yeah, we'll actually concentrate on this problem. It's often just that there's so many other fires that maybe are more important in that moment, or certain people on leadership care about certain things, and what you're proposing is not one of them at that moment, you know? There's a limited amount of things that any of us can often do to control how that kind of information is received. So, say that you do this work to create this vision and it lands really well and you've got a roadmap maybe as part of it and you're okay, now we need to figure out how we're actually going to execute on this, and you're looking at all the things you could spend time on versus maybe you've got like a senior designer and the mid-level designer who are also joining your work to help actually implement that vision. How do you decide what you're going to work on versus what you're going to delegate to the other designers?
I have had the opportunity to work with other designers a couple times at Mercury, and I have a format with them where I look at what their growth areas are, their interests, what the team needs. With one of them, we even had a chart in our one-on-one for every cycle. We do cycles here versus sprints for every cycle of work. And I would make sure that what we were doing was distributed so that this person had an opportunity to lead research, to solve some quality experience issues, to dig into something really deep where they could focus. Because I never want to be in a situation where someone I'm partnering with feels like I took all the good pieces or they didn't get enough out of working with me. So it's something I put at the forefront when I'm working with other designers. The other piece is sometimes at Mercury, given our size, there's no one for me to delegate to. Sometimes I'm the only person who's working on something. And that has been a really interesting growth area for me because my problem is I try to do everything. A manager gave me feedback that I don't let any balls drop. And I was like, yes, isn't that great? And it's not great. It means you end up running around all over the place trying to catch everything. And they said to me, you need to be better at identifying which are crystal and which are rubber. The rubber ones you can just not grab, they're going to hit the ground and bounce. and you can pick them up later. You don't want the crystal ones to drop, they will smash. You have one opportunity to catch those. And I'm not great at this yet by any means, but it's something I'm actively working on to figure out, okay, sometimes delegating when you're the only person is you are intentionally letting that thing drop. You're delegating to the floor and you are focusing on catching these things that will shatter if you don't catch them.
I love that analogy, and I'm definitely going to reference that in the future because I also historically definitely had challenges. I think it's hard as designers. We see everything and we want everything to be handled really well with a certain caliber of quality. I think we're just really good at noticing problems and thinking about how to solve them. The reality is we can't work on everything, and there are almost never enough people on the team to actually solve all of the challenges that exist at any given point. And especially when you're in a situation where it's just you will have to decide, okay, this is not a big enough fire at this very moment. And I think that's a good reminder, especially as a person who is at that staff level. You have to figure out the best investment of your time, solving the most critical challenges that are happening at any given moment versus spreading yourself across potentially up to 10 different challenges. Because if you're doing that, then the one that really matters or the two that really matter are just not getting the quality and the focus that they deserve.
Totally.
Gosh, I am curious when you do delegate, pieces of work, if you do have a situation where you're working with another designer or two, how do you make sure that the quality is at the bar that it should be at?
This is one of the hardest transitions for me from being a lead designer into a staff designer because I feel like when I was an IC3 and an IC4, I would be given work at the scope where I could fully own everything end to end. I am pretty type A. I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, and so I really liked being able to absolutely own everything. As a staff designer, I can't do that. And so I think being really clear upfront about what you want the outcomes to look like and then being okay with the solutions not necessarily being the same way that I would do something. And a lot of the times they're better than the way that I would do it. But I've had a couple projects where I haven't been very clear at the outset of what I expect the outcomes to be. And I've been frustrated mostly with myself because I wasted someone else's time and my time. And so now I try to, if I'm in a position where I am working with someone else and delegating, really focus on what I want that end result to be. And then just checking in on it. I like to be left alone. I like a lot of space. And so I'm really sensitive to people feeling like they're being micromanaged or nagged. But I do think that there's a level of setting that up front of like, hey, we're going to check in at this time, this other week. I just transitioned out of a team to move into this new area. And one of the things I did is write a transition doc for myself and the designer who would be taking over. And I put in those checkpoints of, okay, in this cycle, here's how you're showing up and here's how I'm showing up. And in this one, it's going to shift into you're taking over everything, I'm shadowing. I will leave all the channels that I'm shadowing at the end of this cycle. In this cycle, it's just you. You're doing it. And I think having that up front makes it, I'm hoping, I'm going to check in with them and see how it landed, but I'm hoping that it makes it feel less like micromanagey and more like I laid out a path and they can call me out if I didn't stick to it.
I love that because it gives you both the chance to express any needs that you have up front. And that is what I've noticed when I'm working with another designer as well. It's really important to make sure that you're sharing expectations, whether you're like new to the project or you're rolling off the project, or you're going on PTO and the other person is driving while you're out. I think these are all opportunities to make sure that you are on the same page about how you want to operate. It makes a lot of sense as somebody who's also, I definitely run type A, am a perfectionist historically as well. And at the same time, because I think of those tendencies, I've always felt like, step off, like I don't need other people looking too deeply at my work. I'm already judging myself so much, and now you're in here too. Like, it's a little too much. I'm curious for you, like, how do you adjust or like, how do you figure out who needs more hands-on support than less? Because sometimes there are going to be people who you leave them alone for like a couple days to a week, they do great, and you're just positively astonished. And then there's other people where it's like they're just kind of newer, or maybe they just didn't really understand like where you were trying to go with things or what the intention is, and they just kind of go in an interesting direction. How do you handle, how do you diagnose that, and how do you handle that?
I like to take some time to watch how people are showing up in order to make that judgment call because the a couple times earlier in my career, I've made that call too early and I've really offended someone. It's awful. So now I'm a little bit more careful about it. I tend toward just assuming that people can handle it and they will prefer more autonomy, and I will lean in more kind of when they're pulling me in, saying, "Hey," an example is one-on-ones. I'll ask them what they think the cadence should be. And sometimes it's spot on. They're like, yep, we should do this every week. I'm going to need you. And sometimes they're off. Someone who I have maybe made the call that maybe they need a little bit more is like, yeah, we'll catch up once a month. Or like, I'll just
Oh.
call you when I need you. Then I will propose just for a short time, just to try it out, because I might be wrong. Hey, why don't we do it this way, just for this period of time? And then I'll update my judgment on whether or not it's needed. But I try to just keep it flexible because I've been wrong. I've been wrong about how much support someone needs or doesn't need.
Yeah, you don't want to create too much friction over things like that. And that is one of the challenges of being like a leadership figure for sure, but without having really any direct authority. You just kind of have to see like where is the right space to be so this person feels respected and has like a positive morale and views me as a collaborator rather than somebody who's a rival or something like that, which it's always interesting. There's so many possible dynamics, and I really appreciate that you're trying to make sure that you show up as somebody who is supportive and respectful and just encourages that kind of autonomy. Okay, we're getting a little closer to the end of time, so I do have to ask because right now is an interesting time in design, and that was part of why I wanted to have these conversations in general. In the past year, I think we've seen a lot more of an encouragement, or sometimes in some cases, a requirement to figure out how to integrate everybody's favorite acronym AI into the work. How are you thinking about AI at this moment? What does it mean in terms of how you work with it?
I oscillate between, oh no, and optimism. You've caught me on an optimistic day, week. So that's exciting. I think it's a tool. I think that we're in this process of figuring out how to use this tool. And that means that there's a lot of stabs at things that feel inappropriate or silly because they are. I've definitely tried to use AI for something that it didn't really meaningfully make a difference. It's really nice to have space, especially at work. Mercury has sanctioned you are all going to learn how to do this. It is important. It's a tool. It's not going away, but this is a safe space for you to try and learn things. We have cohorts where designers who are more advanced are teaching other designers like myself how to use these things more effectively. So that's been really encouraging and interesting.
I'm curious about how it's potentially impacting how you view your role, even potentially.
Ooh, okay, really juicy. I think that this is my last job as a product designer. I think
Ooh.
that title is going to go away. Or if it does go away, I'm not going to be sad or surprised. It had a really nice run. I think it was something like 8 years of that title being around. And it's going to morph into something else. It always does. I don't think the need for design or thoughtfulness or quality is going to go away. It's just going to arrive in a different shape. And I think that's fine and it's exciting. It might not be something I want to do, but I'll make that call when we get there. But I'm trying not to hold too much onto the way that I did things in the past because how you got here won't get you there.
That's real. And what year did you start designing? Can I ask?
2010.
Okay, so you remember you were there before Figma. We're just always swapping tools. And actually, I feel like this is the longest period of stability we've had the
Yes.
entirety of my career. I think this is year 16 for me as a professional designer. And I honestly am shocked it took this long for us to
Me
switch to
too.
something else. Yeah.
It's crazy. I was just playing this back in my head the other day. When I started, it's not even a media author. This is my
Ooh.
contract role at Microsoft. It's essentially a production artist. And then UI artist, UX designer, UI
Mm.
UX designer. Product design was something I advocated for in 2015 or so at the company I was at. I was like, hey, I'm doing product things, I'm doing research. I kind of want my role to be this. Also, I'd like to be paid more because product designers get paid more than UX designers.
Correct.
And it has been that since that time. It's weird, actually, that it hasn't changed. So I think part of this anxiety and this rapid change and all these things happening is because things were stagnant for a while, and now it's all really speeding back up.
Have you noticed anything about just like expectations in terms of how much you as a person can produce during this time?
Yeah, I think that there are some assumptions about, oh, if you have AI, now you can do two times as much or three times as much. I think that we're in a moment of learning where some things that may be true, and for some things that won't be true, but we haven't actually seen the outcomes yet. So the expectation is there. That's pretty heavy. I am trying to, just based on past experience, when new technologies become available, it has always followed this cycle of, oh, this is here, we can use this, our output will 2x, and then it didn't, but it changed some things and some things stayed the same. I expect the same to happen here. So I'm just trying to keep focused on what's directly ahead and not get caught in the swirl or lost in the sauce.
Speaking of, so I know you said that the title might change. We'll see what happens. What is keeping you in design right now?
Ooh, I think it's that feeling of really solving a problem for someone. And I haven't found any other career where I've been able to do this and any other medium where I've been as successful. And so I think if that goes away, say every human being has an agent that interprets the world on their behalf and it's fully customized to them. I don't think that product design, which exists because humans had trouble interacting with interfaces and experiences that were designed by people who maybe couldn't see through that other person's lens, maybe that job doesn't exist anymore, but there will always be problems that need to be solved in the world. So maybe that's when I switch into service design for events or figuring out how to help people interact with each other live. Like all of the skills that you and I have built over this time still translate into the world. But until this current job peters out, I kind of just want to give it 100 and leave everything on the mat. And then when the mat's taken away, I'll look around and figure out what's next.
Relatable. I also enjoy a lot of the things you mentioned. And yeah, problem solving is fascinating. People are fascinating. And this is a great format to get to just explore and be curious and help people and to be of service. And I am looking at service design in the corner, like, okay, one of these days, that's going to be us. But for now, yeah, product design, I do enjoy it a lot. I love moving rectangles. I'm curious. So, last question before we completely wrap. What advice would you have for someone who is new to the staff design position?
I think I would say figure out what staff design means in the company that you're at. Don't just assume that it might match the role you were previously doing, just turned up. There's a bunch of things that are entirely new to the staff role that I wasn't aware of before I moved into it. Delegating, leading without authority, a lot of the topics in your book, just to call that out.
Hey,
So really take the time to reconsider how this role is very different from the one you just came from. And then invest in learning those new things.
prescient advice. And where can people find you on the internet?
They can't on LinkedIn. That's really the only public presence I have, and there's not a lot on there. But please send me a message if you want to chat. And Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Amazing. Thanks for joining us. All right, watchers and listeners, again, you can find Jen in chapter 5 and 7 of this fun book I wrote. And with that, thanks for listening.